Nehemiah 2, 1 to 10, and we'll stop at that point. Now, very briefly, to recap on last week, we saw the situation last week facing Nehemiah, that you remember he was greeted by this very sad and tragic news concerning Jerusalem. The walls were broken down, the task there was unfinished, the task of rebuilding the city, and therefore God's people were vulnerable to attack, and God's honor was at stake. And we remember that hearing this news, he sat down and wept and mourned and fasted and prayed, and went on like this for 4 months. He was so burdened and concerned about it. And in his prayer, he confessed the sin of the people, including himself in his father's house, and also he remembered the greatness and the faithfulness of God and the wonderful promises that God had made to his people, and he claimed these promises humbly again, having put his life right with God, having confessed his sin. Now this week we look at Nehemiah seizing a great opportunity. And very, very often the Christian life will be seizing opportunities for the Lord. It may be an opportunity of speaking to someone for Christ, of inviting a person to a service, a guest service, a lunch hour service, whatever it may be. Maybe an opportunity of some kind of Christian service, of helping someone, of visiting someone, of doing all sorts of practical things for them, whatever it may be, of giving them some practical help, or working in the annex, or all sorts of things. When we have an opportunity, we could take it, and we must do so. Indeed, that's the important thing, that when we really pray about Christian service in the very widest sense of that word, I have no doubt at all that God will give us many opportunities. But it's terribly important that we take these opportunities and actually do something about it. I just want to dwell on this for a moment. You see, very, very often, we ourselves have to be, in part, the answer to our own prayers. I think it's so important about this. You see, I may pray with all my heart that people will come to St. Cuthbert's and be converted. The question is, what am I actually doing about it myself? I remember one mission, one of perhaps many missions rather like this, one outstanding mission which I was on, a student mission, where the Christian Union there had prayed and prayed and prayed, very deep, fervent prayers, and had gone on for many hours praying for this mission. It was one of the best prayed for missions I can remember. Publicity was good and the preparation was good. The whole thing had been thought through for 18 months before the mission actually came to pass. But on the first night, the Christians were there, and they all looked around and said, "Where's everybody else?" And there were only very, very few non-Christians there. And the second night, the same thing happened. The third night, the same thing happened. And only very, very few non-Christians were there. Here they were praying that God would bring them in, but not really doing very much about it themselves. Whereas, of course, the real situation, remember how that famous prayer in Acts chapter 4, where the disciples there are praying that God would notice the terrific threats that the disciples were faced with, and they prayed this, "And now, Lord, look upon their threats, and grant to thy servants to speak thy word with all boldness, while thou stretchest out thy hand to heal," and so on. You must heal, we can't heal, but we must speak. We realize, people are not going to get converted unless we speak. We need boldness to speak, but we pray for boldness that we may do the speaking, that we may go forward and put ourselves in a position where we take the opportunities that you give us day by day. Or let me relate it for a moment to the annex. I heard someone went down the other night and made the comment, "You haven't made much progress down here, have you?" I'm not sure they really meant it like that, and I've only heard this second hand, and therefore, but I think Noel Kelly was a little distressed by this, because numbers there have made an astonishing amount of progress. Perhaps a fairly small band have been there really night after night, almost every single night, but made a fantastic amount of progress, and worked very, very hard indeed. Well, now, I know lots of us cannot help in the annex at the moment for all sorts of obvious reasons. But if we could help, in our concern for this and our prayer for this, what are we doing about it? If you pray for opportunities, are we taking them when the opportunities are there? Practical help or talking to people about the Lord? You see, Nehemiah didn't just pray for those people in Jerusalem that they might get on with the work and that they might do something about it. But he was willing to be the answer to his own prayers, even though for him this was going to put him in a difficult and dangerous position, as we shall see in a moment. You'll know the very old story about the young man at the missionary meeting who showed his noble consecration by saying, "Lord, here am I, send my sister." But all too often it is true that we can do this and yet expect someone to do the very job that in fact we ourselves have to do. And I've got to be involved with the need if I'm praying for that need, only too often. I think sometimes it is easier, for us to withdraw from opportunities of evangelism, meeting with non-Christians and practical help and so on. It is easier for us to come together in Christian fellowship. We can have many prayer meetings and many Christian gatherings, and we can pray and pray and pray and pray because we find it relatively easy meeting with those with whom we have a lot in common spiritually. It is much harder in many ways going right out and making the contact with those with whom we may differ in all sorts of basic things. That is sometimes much harder. Remember that Christ has no hands but our hands to do his work today. He has no feet but our feet to seek out those that stray. He has no eyes but our eyes to shine with God's great love. He has no lips but our lips to lift men's thoughts above. A chap called Nicholas Butler said, "I divide the world into three classes: the few who make things happen, the many who watch things happen, and the overwhelming majority who have no notion of what happens." And Nehemiah was one of the first, in the first class, the few who made things happen as we need to be. So 4 months had to go on while he was fasting and praying without any sign of an opportunity. You couldn't come into the king's presence unless called. You couldn't speak to the king unless first spoken to. Now let's look at the passage itself in detail. How the opportunity was given, first of all. First, it came in the course of his ordinary duties, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, or Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Notice the last verse of the previous chapter, I was the cupbearer to the king. Now this was his ordinary duty, this was his ordinary thing that he was doing, and this was in fact the God-given moment for him to ask for the special request that he was about to make. And what I would simply draw from that simple thought is this, that opportunities for witnessing to Christ will very often come in the most ordinary ways. Not just at great rallies and guest services and so on, but in the most ordinary ways when you're sitting in a bus or walking down the street or in a shop or wherever it may be, but in the most ordinary ways day by day, we need to open our eyes to the opportunities that we have. The best conversation I've had with a non-Christian this week was in giving a lift to a person. Just a very simple way, and yet for 20 miles we talked about nothing except the gospel. And then I'm afraid he had to get out because he was going to his home. But this is so often the way in which it happens. Remember the very beginning of Acts, when that cripple was healed at the Gate Beautiful. It says at the very beginning of Acts 3, "Now Peter and John were going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour, as they always did." This is the thing that they always did. And there was a cripple, and there God gave them a gift of faith. There was a remarkable healing, and consequently 2,000 were converted. Just as they were doing what they had done day by day by day by day, a very ordinary thing. It was interesting, if you like, that after their fantastic experience at Pentecost, they didn't sit down and say, "Now let's have an evangelistic campaign in June, and we'll have a healing campaign in July, and we'll have a revival campaign in August," and so on, and planning ahead like this. They took every opportunity as they were given naturally in their ordinary course of everyday life. And I would say that special Christian efforts such as crusades and campaigns and even guest services at St. Cuthbert's are God's second best. I believe this with all my heart. They become necessary because we as individual Christians are not gossiping the gospel day by day, are not constantly engaged in the work of bringing Christ to people in all their needs and bringing the love of Christ there. We're not using our homes and our circle of friends as we ought to, and therefore we have to have special efforts. I remember seeing this very, very clearly a few years ago, just before I came to York, when during about a 6-month period, the Lord gave me an incredible number of wonderful opportunities in personal evangelism. And week after week after week, there were 1 or 2 or 3 or more people finding faith in Christ, all through personal contact. It was an exceptional time, if you like, for about 6 months. I remember about a year later getting involved in one of the Billy Graham relays, and a fantastic number of man-hours put into this to prepare for these relays was unbelievable almost. The number of committees one sat on, the number of preparatory meetings one went to, and so on. I cannot think of one person that I know personally from that month of relays that was converted and stands today, that I know personally. But in the ordinary course of daily life, God gives opportunity after opportunity, if only we look for it. Relays, crusades and campaigns are God's second best, I believe, although they're necessary because we're not doing our stuff day by day. That's the first thing. The opportunity came in the ordinary course of his duty. Secondly, the opportunity came because Nehemiah was so concerned and prayerful. The end of verse 1. Now I had not been sad in his presence, but obviously was sad now, and the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? There's nothing else but sadness of the heart." And I was very much afraid. Incidentally, it's amazing how much we give away by our faces and expressions. If I have toothache, most people will know it. If a person's in love, everyone will know it. If a person is off form spiritually, the discerning person will know it. If things are not right, if we lost our joy in the Christian life, we'll probably know it. If there are trials and problems and so on, probably, again, the discerning person will know it. Just as if we have God's blessing in us, we can't keep that a secret either. Our faces and expressions show a very great deal, as I've often known to my cost. But the important point is here, surely, that opportunities will come insofar as we really want them. Here, Nehemiah was really burdened about this need. He'd been weeping and mourning and fasting and praying week after week, month after month. And because of that, his concern and burden was written right across his face. And because he really longed for an opportunity to help his people, so the opportunity came. Forgive me, those who have heard this illustration, but it's such a classic one in my own experience that I've referred to this again and again to illustrate this principle, that opportunities come insofar as we really want them. Once on holiday, when one tries to withdraw from people a little bit, escape from people, I was in a little hotel in North Cornwall and took down a pile of books and just wanted to read them one by one and not talk to anyone at all. And after I'd been in that hotel about a week or 10 days, as I was reading the Bible in the morning, the Lord convicted me that although the hotel had quite a lot of other people in it, I hadn't even attempted to speak to a single person about Christ. I was with my family, it was before I was married, with my mother and sister, and I hadn't attempted to speak to anyone about Christ. And so I said, "Lord, I ask your forgiveness about this. I really want to be an ambassador for Christ in this hotel if you will give me an opportunity." And immediately after breakfast, it was a rainy day and people weren't streaming down to the beach, I had a tremendous talk with one man, a youngish man, though from what I had seen of him at a distance, very much the center of a great party of people, the most unlikely person I would have thought of in the whole hotel. And he poured out his heart to me that he was a director of a building firm and yet not knowing where he was going in life. And we talked for 3 hours that day, and we talked more in the remaining 2 or 3 days of the holiday, and a fortnight later, on his own at home, he gave his life to Christ, and now he's going right ahead in the Christian life, and it's exciting to see it. But here's a man that God was working in. I couldn't see it outwardly, but as I really prayed for an opportunity, God gave it to me. And I found again and again that if I really want opportunities like this, then I will have them. If I don't want them, I won't find them at all. So God won't thrust these opportunities in front of us unless we want them and unless we're willing to take them. Also, from this little verse here about sadness, God's moment may often come in a surprising and disturbing way when on the surface things seem disastrous. You see at the end of verse 2, he said, "I was very much afraid." Why was he afraid at that moment? Partly, perhaps, because this was the opportunity. He mustn't sort of fumble it and make a mess of it. But more important, perhaps immediately important, the penalty for being sad in the king's presence was death. See that in Esther, the next book. In those days, to be sad in the king's presence meant death. And so when the king said, "Now, why are you sad? Your whole life is full of sadness," he was afraid. But this was a terrific moment. And often we shall find the very best moments for the gospel, perhaps, will be in times of some crisis, through an illness or through bereavement or through an accident or through some disappointment or through some kind of tragedy. Things outwardly seem to be wrong, everything going wrong, but this could be God's moment for something very wonderful and powerful to happen. Obviously, the most striking example of that is the cross itself. Everything gone wrong, apparently, but this was God's moment for the salvation of the world. And if we want God to work powerfully in our lives, don't expect things to go easily. When the Virgin Mary said, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word," and there God was going to work wonderfully through her. Little did she imagine the utter frustration surrounding the birth of her child, having to travel from Nazareth down to Bethlehem and all the crowded city and so on, utterly frustrating. And little did she imagine the unspeakable horrors of the cross. A good many other things beside between the two. "A sword will pierce through your own soul also," warned old man Simeon. And indeed it did. She was willing to be used, but it wasn't easy. And it very seldom will be. Opportunities may come in the most disturbing and sometimes frightening ways if we really want to be used by the Lord. It won't be always easy. God may put us into situations we say, "Lord, what is going on? Why are you doing this with my life? I don't understand." But if we realize that God is still in control, maybe we'll find right in the midst of this difficulty, tragedy, whatever it may be, God is opening a door for the gospel, for his love to go through. How the opportunity was given then? In the ordinary course of daily life, and because Nehemiah was rarely concerned and prayerful, they came in a rather disturbing way. Now notice how the opportunity was taken. And there's three things about this, quite briefly. First, complete honesty on Nehemiah's part. End of verse 2, "I was very much afraid. I said to the king," however, is completely honest, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lies waste and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king probably wasn't very interested in this kind of thing, and Nehemiah might have felt, well, the king won't want to hear that, and he might easily have sort of tried to conceal it and been a bit deceitful and a bit sort of cunning in his answer. But he was absolutely honest. There was a reason why his face was sad. He didn't mind the king knowing about it, however angry the king might have become. And I would simply say this: it is never, never right to be underhand in the Lord's work. Paul says in one place, "We have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning." You'll find the mark of the false teachers is usually cunning of various ways. They will put forward literature without saying where the literature comes from. They will try and approach you in rather sort of cunning, underhanded ways, if you like. This is often the mark of the false teacher. The Christian shouldn't be underhand in his ways of working. Peter says, "Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they behold, glorify God in the day of visitation." The end never justifies the means. We need to be honest. We need to honor the Lord in everything that we do, even though it might seem to be a stupid thing. "Them that honor me, I will honor." And so many Christians who will testify to the fact that when I sought to honor God, God honored me, even though I seemed to be rash in what I was doing. Complete honesty, that was the first thing. Secondly, constant prayer. You see this lovely illustration of prayer in verse 4 and 5. "Then the king said to me, 'For what do you make request?' So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king," etc. Now that could only have been the quickest possible arrow prayer or wireless prayer, because obviously he had no time to pray anything more than just a very brief prayer which is sent up to heaven. But let me say this, for wireless prayers, this is a quick prayer which is sent up to heaven. For wireless prayer to be effective, you must be already in tune with the Lord. In my bedroom, I've got a little transistor set which is always tuned in to the radio, and so while I'm shaving, when I'm not really awake, I just flick on the switch, if you like, and on comes 5 o'clock news, or 6 o'clock news, or 7 o'clock news, or 8 o'clock news, or whatever it may be. I think it's probably getting more like the 7 o'clock news or 8 o'clock news in the recent hectic days with the children. But you flick on the transistor set and on it comes because it is already in tune. We don't have to hunt around. Now, it's only when we are already in tune with the Lord, when we already are prayerful and our relationship is right with the Lord, that this arrow prayer, this wireless prayer, can be effective. And then we can suddenly say in a moment of temptation, Lord, help me. Lord, I need your guidance. Lord, just show me, and so on. I remember a very famous speaker who will be nameless. I was present at this rally, who was trying to illustrate the wireless prayer like this, and he was talking to young people, and he said, if I'm hopping mad with someone and I want to knock his block off, I'll say, Lord, help me. Then he suddenly realized what he'd said. But seriously, when we're talking to the Lord, and when we're talking to other people, rather, and we realize this may be an opportunity, what a thing it is to just lift up your heart in prayer again and again. Maybe I'm talking to someone, for example, this person I gave a lift to, and we were talking about what is the nature of sin, what does sin mean? And one could just very, very briefly, Lord, just saying, Lord, please help him to understand, give him light, give him understanding. And constantly one could lift up one's heart in prayer. And there are many, many situations when you haven't got time for real prayer, but if you are in tune with the Lord, these wireless prayers or arrow prayers can be of fantastic value. And I hope that we shall learn to do this and so practice the presence of God constantly. Sorry? A prayer plane. Now, that's another way of calling it. Good. Mr. Hudson Pope's way of describing it. So there was complete honesty in taking this opportunity, constant prayer right in the middle of the opportunity, thirdly, gracious boldness. You know that slogan, attempt great things for God and expect great things from God. Often we don't see great things from God because we don't attempt great things from God. And you can just see here, and no need to comment really, but just look at the way in which he asked very boldly. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, notice the gracious way, he didn't just blurt in, but if your servant has found favor in your sight, we should always be polite and gracious as Christians, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may rebuild it. A gracious but specific request, quite specific that. Not that, perhaps we might sort of be able to help them in some way, but that this is what I want to do, that you may send me to Judah, that I may rebuild it, that city. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, I'm not quite sure why that is put in, but either the queen was very kind towards Nehemiah, or perhaps this is even more of a miracle because the queen was very angry about Nehemiah. I don't know, but anyway, it's put in there for some reason. The king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Although the time isn't given there in that verse, in fact he was given immediately 6 months' pay with holiday. 6 months' holiday with pay. Same thing, actually. I don't know what you're laughing about. And not only that, but he had the 6 months' holiday with pay, and immediately after that he had 12 years actually working, rebuilding the walls. And if that isn't a bold prayer and bold request, I don't know what is. But that is quite something. 6 months holiday with pay, followed by 12 years working on the project. And in verse 7, he goes on to be very, very specific. And I said to the king, increasing his boldness, if it pleases the king, let letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house which I shall occupy. Very specific. And the king granted me what I asked. Why? For the good hand of my God was upon me. I think this is the heart of the matter. It all depends in our prayer and in our boldness for the Lord if we really believe that God is sovereign and God is in control of everybody and anybody, whoever that person may be. Whether they are a God-fearer or an absolute atheist, heathen, God is still in control of that situation completely. And of course there are many, many, many modern parallels to this. You probably remember various ones in the Mary sisters, in the book Realities, and when they came to speak here in York, various occasions, I needn't go into the details, when they had to ask some absolutely leading official for permission to build or for some land that they needed for Canaan's land there in Darmstadt. And they were told by this leading official it was absolutely out of the question. But they knew very well that with God nothing is absolutely out of the question. That God is in control even of those people who say it is absolutely out of the question. And therefore, because they believed this is what God was wanting them to have, they went forward with great boldness in prayer and great boldness in persisting with their request. And astonishingly got exactly what they wanted, indeed even more than they had originally asked for. And again, this is what we shall find if we are bold and gracious in the Lord's service. Soaked in prayer, seizing God's opportunities when they come. Now, I want this to be a slightly briefer one tonight because it's a very muggy evening, I think a difficult evening to concentrate for too long. But let me just give two postscripts before we come to the end of this passage here, in verses 9 and 10. Verse 9 is the first postscript. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. He hadn't asked for that. But it's part of God's nature when you're really trusting in his control and power that he is able to answer exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. And when we're bold in his service, we shall be astonished that he not only answers our request, but more than answers our request. And here he went with the letters and with protection, with officers of the army and horsemen, to make quite sure that he would get through and that there would be no hindrance at all. That's the first postscript. The second postscript is in verse 10. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. And here you are introduced to the two villains of the piece that we shall see again and again. And it's a very significant thing in 1 Corinthians 16 verse 9 that Paul says this, a wide door for effective work has been opened to me, and there are many adversaries. You always get these two things going hand in hand. Don't be surprised. Things going astonishingly well, but we are engaged in spiritual warfare. The devil never lets the Lord's work go forward unhindered. And the moment when God opens a wide door for effective work, then, together with that, you will find many adversaries. And they were just beginning to discover these people who were not at all pleased and stirred up a great deal of trouble, as we shall see in the days to come. Well, there is something on seizing opportunities. God will give them if we trust. They may come in surprising ways, but when they do come, it's honor God by complete honesty, by constant prayer, and by gracious boldness, trusting that he is sovereign in every situation, even when there are many adversaries coming along as well.